Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Next Chapter. I'm your host, Whitney Clark, and I feel like I say this every single episode, but I am so excited about the author that we're talking to today. We're talking to Steven Rowley. He's joining us today, a New York Times bestselling author. He wrote The Guncle, which was a Goodreads Choice Awards finalist for Novel of the Year in 2021, and now he's out with a sequel, The Guncle Abroad. Steven, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about The Guncle Abroad. Where are we joining Patrick in the crew when this one begins?
Well, maybe I'll backtrack and just give the sort of a quick overview of the original book, The Guncle. As many know, it's a story about Patrick O'Hara, who's sort of a semi-retired television actor living a somewhat reclusive life in Palm Springs when he is tasked with taking in his niece and nephew for the summer after the death of their mother. And it leads to sort of a season of healing for all three of them. But at the end of the book, those kids went home with their dad back to a house where their mom was not there. And over the years, since The Guncle came out and talking to readers, I kept thinking back to those kids, how are they doing? A lot of people think I assumed I dove back into these waters because Patrick is such a fun character to write. And, he is, but there's a lot of me in Patrick, I think. Certainly our senses of humor are the same. So, I could access Patrick whenever I needed him, but it was those kids, I kept thinking about those kids and how in many ways their grief journey was just beginning at the end of that book. After a summer with their uncle. And so it was really wanting to check in with those children and see how they were doing that led me to work on a sequel. But it's 5 years after the events in the first book. And Greg, the children's father and Patrick's brother, is getting remarried. And the kids are not happy about it. And so Patrick is re-enlisted, as it were, to sort of teach them this time not just about grief, but also about love and why there needs to be joy and celebration and room for new experiences in life as we move forward.
This is set in Italy. Did you have to do any research? Did you go to Italy? Did you go to Lake Como and the places in this book for this one?
I try as a sort of rule of thumb not to write about places I haven't been, because I think you can always tell. I think a reader can always tell when an author is just like writing something based on Google Maps or Google Earth or, some research that sometimes falls flat. So yes, I have been. Sadly, my trips to Italy were all pre-COVID. I wish I had gone back again so I could have somebody to tell my accountant, no, this was research, I promise.
It was a business trip.
It was a business trip, I know, but now I can't wait to go back. I truly can't wait to go back. I love the Italian setting for this book. I love the people in Italy, and I have done some extensive travel there, and I always love going back.
You kind of mentioned this when we started talking about The Guncle, the first book. When you wrote the first book, did you have any idea that you would be writing this continuation of the story?
No, I really felt, that book was complete, but I was taken very much by surprise from readers' reactions to that book and how beloved it seems to be with many readers. And that, is the one thing that an author has absolutely no control over is how readers are going to embrace that book. And I'm just so surprised and touched and humbled by what a special place it holds in many readers' imaginations and on their shelves. So it wasn't something that I thought of as the story continuing, but I was caught up in the enthusiasm of people's embrace of that first book.
What do you think really touched people so much about this story? What do you hear from readers? What was it about the story that really got to them?
Yeah, the only thing I can really think of is that it's a book that's very funny, but it doesn't sacrifice tackling some of the harder topics in favor of the humor. So it's that balance of heart and humor and emotional honesty that I think is at the heart of what I do. And sometimes it's the hardest part of my craft as well. I take it, for talking about humor, I take it very seriously. Sometimes You can write one too many jokes in a scene, and it just deflates the emotion that you're trying to get across. And conversely, sometimes you can go too long without giving the reader the opportunity to take a breath with a laugh that can color the work too darkly. So it's finding that balance, I think, is what makes the book special with readers, or at least that's what I think. I think it's obvious that I'm very much inspired by Auntie Mame. These were books by Patrick Dennis from the 1950s, a series of books that I just loved. But Mame, inherited her nephew after the death of his parents and immediately sent him off to boarding school, and it sort of sidestepped the issue of grief in favor of the humor and the hijinks, which I loved. But I knew these are sort of serious times we live in now, and particularly coming off of COVID and whatnot. We've all had a lot of loss. We've all been grieving something, and it may not be a person per se, but we've all lost time and the ability to be together in a way. And so I didn't want to. I knew immediately I didn't want to sidestep that, which I think is an important aspect of the story.
Grief is a theme in your books. Loss is something that's universal. We've all lost someone that we've loved. How has your personal life played a role in writing about some of these big topics?
Yeah, it takes a long time to write a book, and life continues, and it intercedes in strange ways. Partway through writing the first book, The Guncle, I lost one of my best friends from college to breast cancer, and she left behind a 6-year-old son. And so it really, if I wasn't already thinking seriously about grief in children before, it did sort of make me feel a real responsibility to get it right and to think about what is the role of the others in her life to stay with this kid and remind him how fiercely he was loved. And so, in terms of Patrick stepping up and stepping in, in this book, that's, she was someone who was very much at the forefront of my mind and informed the character of Sarah, the children's mom. And so that was really special. But I do write a lot about grief and grieving. And I think a lot of people assume that I've experienced a lot of loss in my life, and I've had my share, certainly, but some of it is anticipatory grief, I guess. But some of it I like to write about that because I think we're a culture that's particularly bad at grief and grieving. And we'll dive into this, but again, the book is hopefully very funny.
It is.
But I do think it's important to tackle this head on because I think there's a feeling that grief should be temporary, or that we should isolate ourselves when we're going through it, or we're a burden to others, or if we just, a lot of us don't grieve and really sort of mentally block it and push it aside, and it can, bubble up years later. And so if you think about it, though, grief should be one of the most uniting parts of the human experience. As you say, if we love somebody, we will, experience loss one day. And so I think, it's such a part of fabric of who we are that I wish we sort of acknowledged that and were more open about it and honest about it. And so that's why I think writing about it too. The unique thing about this sequel was it revisiting grief, 5 years down the line, right? It's not something we necessarily get over. It sort of seeps into the very, part of who we are. And so it was interesting to revisit these characters who might be sort of hardened a little bit or, changed in some way or another by the loss they experienced.
And really, in the Guncle and the Guncle Abroad, I cried and I also laughed out loud at just the dialogue, the interactions between Patrick, Maisie, and Grant. Tell me about the Guncle rules and how you come up with some of those Guncle rules.
Yeah, it really is special. As much as a culture as we are on our phones and we type LOL all the time, it's really hard to make someone laugh out loud. So to truly or evoke an actual emotional reaction, particularly just from reading on the page. So thank you for that. That means a lot. The Guncle rules were from the first book were sort of bon mots, little witticisms about Patrick's view of life. That stemmed from me a little bit, I think. In real life, I don't have children, but I do have 5 nieces and nephews who, I'm very touched by the depth of those relationships. And, I guess I'm a bit of an armchair quarterback, and I have these sort of feelings on parenting, but nowhere to put them. So they went into these Guncle rules, and some are fun and frivolous, like, there's a difference between bottomless mimosas and pantless mimosas, and it's important to know the difference. But some I think are really true, like never love anyone who treats you like you're ordinary. And so it was a way for me to sort of have, my input in the having and raising of kids, even though I don't have any. In this new book, he focuses, instead of rules, on love languages. And so teaching the children how to give and receive love, and to be open to being loved, and how to express that in their own individual ways.
And as much as Patrick is there to teach the kids, especially in the second book, it's like they teach him a lot about love as well, without giving too much away. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, that was the fun part about imagining the kids, particularly, and their characterizations in this sequel, because not only are they 5 years older, instead of 6 and 9, they're now 11 and 14. That's a big difference in terms of growing up, but they've also, lived some life now, and they've had their uncle in their lives for 5 years now. So they're not as charmed by him, perhaps, as they were in the first book. And they know how to push back, right? They've sort of learned how to spar with him in a fun way, which I think he appreciates, but also at times doesn't like when they get the better of him. So it was really fun to think of, like, okay, how have these kids grown under his tutelage, and what of his own medicine can they throw back his way?
I think particularly Maisie is the one that really grows up a lot, becoming a young woman. What was it like for you to see her character grow? How did you use, any of your own nieces and nephews you used as you've seen them grow up throughout the years?
Well, we'll try not to use the word used, but I
Inspired.
do say, God help you if you are related to a writer, because, we are sponges, right? And so I try to respect their privacy, but, I'm always listening at family gatherings and stuff. No, I love Maisie so much. I think there's 2 different, perhaps, reactions to a loss, like the loss of a mother, when you're particularly young. And I think Maisie is forced to, as the oldest, is forced to grow up probably faster than she might have otherwise. Whereas Grant, it's almost sort of delayed, almost as a delayed adolescence in a way. Like he's really, stuck in childhood in a way. But with Maisie, I just love her so much. That it was really a fun and an honor to craft this dynamic character with agency, with the real ability to advocate not only for her younger brother but for herself in a way. And I love seeing her become a young woman.
How soon did you start writing and seriously working on this project after the Guncle initially was released?
Yeah, I didn't, I had another book in between, The Celebrants, which came out last year, and it's just out in paperback. And it wasn't until after I finished that book entirely and started thinking about what I was going to do next. In the back of my mind, when I would get questions from readers about the Guncle or where these characters were now, I thought, okay, well, maybe there's room for more story here. But I didn't just want to do it just to do it. I really felt like I needed an idea and something that I wanted to say with these characters, so that it didn't just feel like a cash grab or something to the pointless exercise in a way. The sequel to Auntie Mame, the novel, was a book called Around the World with Auntie May. So I sort of thought in my head as a continued wink and a nod to those books that if I revisited those characters, I might take them on a trip. And so, once I had the conceit for the wedding, and the time jump, I think really helped. So it didn't feel like I was just repeating the first book in a way, which I think is a danger in some sequels, that I was kind of off to the races, and I was able to pull this book together a little more quickly than writing a novel, because I knew the characters so well.
How, when you sit down to write, do you have a favorite place? Like, do you have like a spot in your house? Do you have a place that you go when you write, or can you kind of just do it anywhere and everywhere?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of renovating a house we'll be moving this year, and I'll have a really dedicated office for the first time, and I'm so excited about that. But yeah, I sort of, I work on my laptop. I sort of pop all over the house. I'm married to another writer. My husband, Byron Lane, had a book out last year called Big Gay Wedding. His previous novel was A Star Is Born. So we sort of do this delicate dance around the house where we can't sort of sit side by side and write. Particularly he gets frustrated with me. You're typing too loudly. And I guess I do bang on the keys when I get excited. But so we're always sort of moving around. But it's nice. For the most part, our house is quiet. I mostly write at home, as I said, because writers are observers. It's hard for me to write out in public because I get drawn, if I were at Starbucks or something, I would get drawn into the conversation at the next table, or, listening and watching, because all those wonderful sort of character details you can pick up from observing other people. But so I try to write at home. I try to stick to a pretty rigid schedule when I'm particularly writing a first draft.
And I understand. I read a story about how he proposed. I was in one of his acknowledgments of one of his books.
Yeah, his first book, A Star Is Born. It's a big day when your finished books land on the doorstep for the first time. And he was like, come here, come read this. And I was like, I've read the book. We're each other's first readers. We read each other's work, draft after draft after draft. And so I'm like, I don't need to see it. I'll just, congratulations, And he's like, no, you've got to read this part. And so, I opened up the back page and the acknowledgments and read the acknowledgement to me, which contained, 4 or 5. Will you marry me? 4 extra words at the very end, which I had no idea about. I think my immediate reaction was, "Is this in all the copies?" And sure enough, it was. So for those who've read the Guncle, I didn't make him wait because there were a year between those two books, but I responded publicly to the proposal in the acknowledgments for the Guncle.
Oh my goodness. And so you guys, you read each other's first drafts. So you're very part of each other's sort of writing process, at least once you've gotten some words on the pages.
Yeah. And that too, it's also, I don't want to say delicate, but we take great care. If I'm asking him for notes on something, it's really sadly up to him sometimes to decipher. Do I respond as a spouse? In which case, he's supportive and cheering me on. Does he, am I asking him kind of as another writer or someone with an editorial eye? And so I think it's sort of we learn which hat to wear with each other, and that's been very helpful to figure that out. But yeah, otherwise it's been quite helpful to have another resource so close at hand.
Yeah. When you sat down to write the Guncle Abroad, how do you channel Patrick? How do you get back into the writing Patrick's character?
Well, as I say, he can be an exaggerated version of me. He's a little younger than I am. He's a little better looking. He's got more money. TV pays more than publishing. So I just sort of imagine him as a slightly exaggerated version of me. He's also been through some things that fortunately I have not experienced in my life. So but it's there. The hardest part is, as I said with Patrick, is that sort of snark and humor that he has, and knowing when to let him be vulnerable, particularly with the kids, and when to let us see behind, that protective wall that he puts up with his humor and whatnot. And then the jokes themselves. I mean, I hate to say it, but the first book, The Guncle, last year won the prestigious Thurber Prize for American Humor. And that I won that award in the middle of writing The Guncle Abroad. So all of a sudden I felt all this pressure, like, oh my God, well, the book has to be funny. Is it going to be funny? Is it funny enough? Are there enough jokes? And then I, after working frantically under that mental headspace, for a while, I had to take a step back and wait, like, oh my God, is it too funny? And not thinking like, because I'm such a genius, but trying to remember what readers really loved about that first book. And it wasn't just the humor, although that is a big part of the recipe. I had to make sure that the other ingredients were all up to snuff as well. And so that's the hard part with Patrick, is really finding that magical balance, and keeping him flawed in a way. You don't just want to make him this sort of magical caregiver that has all the answers all the time. Particularly in that first book, I think readers at the outset are like, wait, why is he getting the kids? Why are they going there? Because it doesn't seem like the best idea at the outset. But I always have to remind people that reading, novels about perfect people who behave perfectly all the time makes for very boring reading. And so there has to be room for the character to grow, and in visiting a new adventure with these characters too. I wanted, Patrick to have his own journey as well, not just the itinerary of what European countries we have, but what is his emotional journey through the second book. And so finding that was key to crafting this novel.
I think endearing is a word I would use to describe, him, especially his relationships with Maisie and Grant. And the dialogue is so quick and funny. And how do you go about writing some of these conversations? Do you write out sort of just generally how they're speaking to each other and then go back and fine tune some of the language? How do you do that?
Yeah, what was interesting about this, writing this sequel is that for the first book, I narrated the audiobook for the first time. It was my first time narrating an audiobook. Normally the publisher will send you some tapes, that you can listen to other narrators read. And I just, the humor was so important to that first book, and getting it and landing it just right. And I wasn't hearing a voice that jumped out at me. And I thought, hey, maybe I could do this. But my publisher didn't necessarily think it was a good idea. I had to audition. I had to put myself on tape, reading, a bit of the book and send it to them. But once I got the go ahead to do that, reading these conversations out loud was really sort of eye-opening to me. And it has since, and moving forward, I think will forever be part of that process, because hearing dialogue out loud, it really does force you to look at it in a different way. I think we've all read books where, and we're not going to call out any names, but we're writers who just sort of have a tin ear for dialogue, and it seems really flat on the page, or overly floral, and you're like, that's not how people talk really in real life. And it brings you out of the story a little bit. And so, sometimes I'll sit there and I'll act out the conversations or talk to myself a little bit, which I'm sure would draw some strange looks if I did work at Starbucks. So thank goodness I don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's, I think of how I talk with my nieces and nephews. I try to capture the spirit of that, get it down on page. But sometimes it is reading it out loud before you're like, oh yeah, this is overly, a one-word response here is more powerful than, 5 sentences or something. Yeah.
And I apologize for using the word used. Inspired. I think inspired by real life is probably better than
Inspired.
used.
Yeah, I'm just like, I have to go be conscious now that my elder nieces are now of an age where they can track down my online presence and start listening to some of these interviews. So I'm like, I would have to be careful about what I say.
What's your favorite thing about being an uncle in real life?
Oh, I will say, and this ties into this as well, that my eldest niece, who is 15 now, read the Guncle for the first time. It's the first time any of them have read my books, and the younger ones are still quite young. But I was on pins and needles the whole time. I'm texting with my sister, like, what did she say? What's happening? What is that? And the response was, she said, well, I can see why it won an award for humor. And I was like, that's very different than saying it's funny or I laughed, like, it's like, oh God, the tough audience, So, that's sort of fun though, thinking about them reading these stories for the first time. I forget the question. What is being an uncle in real life?
You answered the question. Yeah, what is it like being an uncle? Yeah, what's your favorite thing about being an uncle in real life?
That's what it's like. I sort of think, that they will be proud of or impressed by me, and they're always ready to take me down a notch and knock me off the pedestal a little bit, which is a good thing.
Yeah, that's what family's for, right?
That's what family is for, to keep you grounded. Yeah.
What do you hope people take away from the Guncle Abroad?
I hope that what people take away is that, we experience loss, but life goes on, and with time, and with people who support and love you in your life, that there will be room for joy and celebration again. And sometimes that celebration looks a little differently. I think back to the first book a little bit, and there's a big, because I don't want to spoil too much about the second book. So I'm going to throw back to the first book. There's a scene where, they have a Christmas in July party. Christmas with their mom was always a special memory for those kids. And so they throw a Christmas in July party. And because they're in Palm Springs, they have a Pepto-Bismol pink tinsel Christmas tree. And it's hot out and people are jumping in the pool. And, it doesn't look like Christmas in suburban Connecticut, but it can be fun. It just may be different. And that's okay. And I think about that with this book too, like we may have to redefine some of our traditions, but that there will be room for joy and celebration and holding a special place for memories.
I love that. And I think just on a personal note, one of the reasons why the Guncle and the Guncle Abroad touched me and I related to it so much is because life is grief and loss, and it's funny, and you laugh and you cry, and kind of just encapsulated all those feelings. So I'm really looking forward to folks reading the Guncle Abroad. And this is probably an annoying question for you, but do you foresee a third book or Patrick and Maisie and Grant's journey continuing?
Again, I don't have any plans for a third book right now. However, I didn't have plans for a second book, after the Guncle. And so I love these characters. I want to wait and hear from audiences, from readers, let's see how this one goes over. And, if there's an appetite for it, I'm open to it. But again, I want to find the right story and the right thing to say with these characters, because the worst part about imagining a sequel is ruining people's goodwill for these characters, or somehow coloring their memories of the first of the original books or the books that came before it. And so I always want to make sure I have a good story to tell, and not just because there may be demand for it.
Yeah. Well, I'll always remember the Guncle rule. There's a difference. What is it? Pantsless brunch?
Pantsless mimosas or bottomless mimosas. Yeah. Those are two different things. One will get you kicked out of a restaurant, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Steven, well, thank you so much. The Guncle Abroad is out now. And then real quick before we go, are you working on any other projects right now, or is the focus just Guncle Abroad?
Well, I'm very hopeful that there will be a movie version of the
Oh,
Guncle coming soon. That was slowed down by, we had a writer's strike and an actor's strike
yeah.
last year in Hollywood, but hopefully that's picking up steam again. And so, um, stay tuned. Hopefully, have news on that front
Yeah.
soon. And I'm always working on something new. So, people can visit my website or follow me on social media, and I'll be sure to post about these things as soon as I can.
Okay. Steven, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
What a joy. Thank you for having me.